Hello and welcome. Welcome to my channel. This is my wrap up for October 2021, and I seldom do wrap up, but I must say that doing wrap up, I have a particular motivation, and that will be the title of my monthly wrap up videos. Basically, in my I think in a couple of my past wrap up videos that I did, I included the names, the first names of the main characters of the novels that I finished, and I thought that the title looked nice. Well, I was entertained by it. I'm not sure what everyone else thinks. But yeah, I thought, hey, let's do another video with that kind of title. And yeah, it definitely has to be like a monthly wrap-up video. So yeah, this video is going to have 4 first names in the title because I finished 4 novels in October 2021. But yeah, before that, I just kind of want to comment that I am sitting in this position because I find it really comfortable. For some reason, I find this direction really comfortable. It allows for my, posture to be comfortable, but I am aware that it also has a different effect. Basically, the lighting's position is in such way such that my eyes look dramatic. And I hope you can sort of follow me in my wrap-up journey without being creeped out by it. So yeah, again, I hope you're not creeped out by that. Anyway, before I talk about the books that I finished, I am also going to talk about books that I set aside, and also books that I DNF. But and then of course the books I already read. But I'm not going to talk in great details about each of those books because I actually made individual book talk videos about the books that I've already read, and also books that I DNF. I also have a video for that one as well, in which I ranted in greater detail. So if you are interested in checking out those videos, you can check out the link in the description box below. So yeah, I'm going to start with the book that I set aside. I did not experience much from this book. This is called Women of Sand and Myrrh by Hanan Al-Shaykh. So this book was originally written in Arabic, and it was translated into the English by Cobham. And this book is kind of like a collection of vignettes from the point of view of 4 female characters, and all of these 4 female characters, they all just kind of have different personalities, different beliefs. Some of them are a little bit more conservative, some of them a little bit more open-minded, quote unquote, more liberal, and they all live in this I would say they all live in this country in Middle East. So actually the country itself is not really mentioned in this book, if I'm not mistaken. But just a little bit of background, Hanan Al-Shaykh is a Lebanese author, and yeah, I suppose perhaps you could conjecture that these characters live in in Lebanon, but it's not mentioned, I think. Then again, I did not get really far into this book. I only read up until the first chapter, and gotta say though, the first chapter was not bad. I was interested with the premise, about how this book is going to explore the lives of 4 different women and their perspectives, and how their lives are kind of repressive, and the society does not really allow them to do whatever that they want to do because they are women, and the society is like super conservative and all that. And so these women just can't experience the amount of freedom that allows them to just be who they are and do what they want to do. So I think that premise is really interesting. It is quite general and vague as I described it. Partly because I did not get very far into this book, and you might wonder why did I not read it further? And even though I said that the first chapter was nice, and actually while I was reading this book, when I started, I passed through some of the reviews on Goodreads, and I noticed that some of the reviews actually mentioned that the English version of this book, the translated English version of this book, somewhat, it made some fairly liberal change from the original version. And first of all, I just kind of want to say that I don't know how the original Arabic version looks like. I don't read Arabic. I don't have that version with me. So I certainly can't make any comparison and just pretty much conclude how much this translated version deviates from the original version. So yeah, definitely, I do think that it's important to at least give it, the benefit of the doubt, okay? But at the same time, the fact that, those, the reviewers had that comment in their reviews, it sort of planted some seeds of doubts in me, because, I don't know, maybe I just had a little bit too high of an expectation when it comes to translated fiction, because translated fiction are supposed to, if possible, convey the ideas and tones or whatever from the original author in its most pristine condition as possible. And of course, when it comes to translation, some things are bound to change. Some things are bound to be deleted or added, or some kind of modifications could happen. And you should certainly expect that. But sometimes, even if you do expect that kind of things to happen with translated fiction, if, I suppose we all have some kind of threshold level in which how much change we allow to happen, and once you hear that, the translated version of a book is so different according to some people, but you hear that it's so different from the original version, somehow you feel sort of suspicious about this translated version of the book. Is it going to really convey what the author wants us to, wants to convey to us? Will it be able to really show us what the author intends to say? How much of the idea that the author is trying to give us is going to be modified or processed by the translator? So I'm not gonna say that this book is bad, but I'm setting it aside because I do feel somewhat, I feel somewhat doubtful or suspicious about this book because, maybe I'll revisit it again some other time. I do have another book by Hanan Al-Shaykh. It's called The Story of Zahra, which I would probably try because apparently that one, in that book, it was implied that the translation was done with the support and assistance of the original author herself. So maybe I'll try that book instead. So yeah, maybe for this one, I'm gonna try it some other time. But yeah, what do you think about translated fiction in when it comes to changes in translated fiction overall? What are your attitudes towards translated fiction? Because I think my my recent knowledge about the possible deviations that happen in this translated version of Women of Sand and Myrrh sort of allowed me to kind of realize that I do have some kind of expectations when it comes to translated fiction, and it sort of helps me to get to know myself better in terms of my own expectation. But yeah, some of the time for this book. So yeah, next I'm going to move on to books that I DNF, and I'm not going to talk so much about these books because I have a video for them. The first one is a translated fiction. This is Novel Without a Name by Hương, and it was originally written in Vietnamese, translated into the English by Nina McPherson and Phan. And this book is kind of like a series of events that happen to a particular soldier who is fighting in the Vietnam War. One day he receives an instruction from his friend, who is also a higher ranking official, to visit their home village, in order to kind of tend to one of their mutual friends that seems to be in some kind of troubling condition. And as this soldier, his name is Quan, as he returns to his village, he encounters many people who are affected by the war in some ways or another. Some of them are traumatized, some of them have their lives completely uprooted, completely affected by the war. Basically, everyone's lives have been really changed, including the ones that, the people that he once knew in his village as well. His neighbors, his former girlfriend, his family, his father. He learns that many of these people have their lives completely changed because of the war that is happening in their country. So my main issue with this book is that the prose seems meandering, which I think is fine because it sort of describes the, I would say it is kind of parallel to how the main character feels, how Quan feels in regards to the destruction that his country is facing because of the war, how he feels sort of this kind of loss of attachment to people, to places, and just pretty much that kind of apathy in general, trauma-induced apathy. But at the same time, we also see this book progressing in this kind of like a episodic format. It doesn't really have like very clear section breaks. Everything just happens in like this long chapter, and all of the people that he meets are just they feel kind of like seriously background characters. Of course, it also kind of mirrors how the main character feels towards other people. He doesn't really feel like he wants to make forge a long-lasting relationship with these people. But somehow, as readers, we also feel kind of apathetic towards the main, the side characters as well. We don't see like really in-depth exploration of how war affects these people. It just sort of gloss over their lives in general, how the war affects them, but on a more surface level. So I wasn't really satisfied reading that, and it wasn't really doing much to me. Even though I've read up until like more than 50% of this book, it just didn't do much for me. So I decided, it was a little bit too tiring to read, so I just decided to DNF this one. The next one that I finished was originally a buddy read with another booktuber, Shannon from That's So Po, and this one was Preeta Samarasan's Evening is the Whole Day. So Evening is the Whole Day is pretty much a story about a Malaysian Indian family who lives in Ipoh, Malaysia. And the story takes place sometime starting in the around the 50s all the way until the 80s, and we see how the historical events that are happening in Malaysia at the time is kind of affecting the lives of this family. But at the same time, this Indian Malaysian family, their lives within the confines of their homes is also very, very dramatic. So basically, this book starts out with the firing of their servant, one of their servants named Chellam. Apparently, she has done some terrible thing in this household, and we don't know what it is. And we also learn that the grandmother in this household has just recently died under supposedly mysterious condition. We also learn that the eldest daughter in this family, who is bound to fly to the US to further her studies, suddenly becomes this really mopey teenager. So really dramatic. She does not talk to anyone, and we also don't really know why. And there are so many questions in the first chapter of this book that sort of makes you feel somewhat intrigued to find out what really goes on with this family. It seems like everyone is really miserable. And as you read on, you realize that indeed everyone in this family is really miserable, and they all do horrible things to one another. This entire family is super dysfunctional and super toxic. Now, I don't mind a story about a family whose in which the members are like very toxic to one another. I think that is a good ingredient for a good story. But at the same time, another thing that I felt that this book was, did do it for me was the writing. It's super stylized. Like every single line in this book feels like an opportunity for the author to flex her, dramatic writing skill. It seems like this book is just filled with so much adjectives, adverbs, metaphors, similes, all of the different kinds of stylized writing that you can think of. It's here. It's, the writing in this book does not feel simple. It does not feel like it's really straight to the point. It's extremely flowery, and it gets somewhat distracting. And even though I feel somewhat gripped by the fact that there are so many questions and mysteries and intrigue within this highly dysfunctional family, the super flowery writing is just so much. It's just way too much. So I DNF'd it after reading it past the 50% point. So it was really disappointing to DNF 2 books in a month. But now let's get to the nice parts, the books I have finished. First of all, I have finished Kurniawan's Beauty is a Wound. I don't have the book with me anymore, so I'm gonna have the photo in here. So this book was originally written in Indonesian, and it was translated into English by Annie Tucker. Now this is a historical fiction. It's about this the family of one particular woman named Dewi Ayu, and she lives in the 20th century Indonesia. And in her life, she has seen Indonesia being conquered by multiple foreign powers, including the Dutch and also the Japanese. She has also seen how the communists have sort of wreaked havoc in her country as well. And Dewi Ayu, she works as a prostitute, and we see how Dewi Ayu's life develops, starting when she is still a teenager, all the way up until she's an older woman. And we also see the lives of her daughters, who married like guys of different factions, opposing factions actually. And later we also see the stories of the grandchildren of Dewi Ayu as well. So this book, it has plenty of folklore, mythology, and also fantastical elements, which I find really, really interesting. But the most interesting part that I find in this book is that I really like the way that it injects those magical elements in such a way that it feels really deadpan, and also at the same time really humorous. And at the same time, the book also contains extreme amount of violence and blood and just pretty much straight up horrible things, different kinds of abuse, sexual crimes. All of these things are just, this novel is just loaded with all of these things in such a way that it feels almost satirical. In fact, I would say that this book is fairly satirical in a way, and the inclusion of all these elements make it feel like almost slapstick as well. But yeah, at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's really flippant when it comes to treating sexual abuse, treating violence. There is some kind of respect. I particularly like the way that this novel treats its women characters, because somehow I just get this vibe that even though women characters generally are treated with are met with really horrible circumstances in this book. Basically, things like sexual assault happen in every single chapter, and they happen to female characters. But in a way, the female characters are written in as the ones who have more, higher agency, the ones who have, the ones who drive the plot more, the ones who have stronger, fortitude in this novel. And somehow reading these female characters, reading about Dewi Ayu and her daughters, it kind of makes you feel like this sense of awe towards these characters. And overall, I just really love this book. I think that one of the main ideas that this book is trying to drive home is that it really wants to kind of show this parallel between the raping, the sexual abuse that the women, the female characters in this book face, is sort of like a parallel to the plundering and the pillaging that happened to a particular land of a country because of colonization of a foreign powers. And I think it's fairly on the nose, that kind of comparison, although it's not explicitly told, but I feel that it is definitely there, which I personally think is a concept that I feel to be nicely explored in this book. So yeah, I really like this book. Of course, it has plenty of those, the ones that I mentioned just now, trigger warning. So yeah, one of my favorite books this year, I would say, and maybe even one of my all-time favorites now. And now moving on to the second book that I finished is a Victorian novel. This is Anthony Trollope's The Warden. Reading this book literally gave me some kind of anxiety because, basically what happens in this book is that we have this warden, Septimus Harding, and he lives in this quiet town called Barchester, and he works as the precentor at the local cathedral and also as the warden of a local almshouse, in which he receives a fairly good amount of salary. And at the same time, the almshouse also serves 12 elderly men who works as beadsmen, and they also receive some kind of income as well, but their income is much lower compared to what the warden receives. Now, what the warden receives is not something that the warden himself controls. Like, Mr. Harding does not decide how much money he gets. He was simply appointed as the warden, and he just pretty much agrees to whatever amount of income that he gets. But somehow there's an arrival of a particularly zealous young man with reformist idea. His name is John Bolt. He sees this situation and he thinks that there is some kind of injustice happening in the possible malappropriation of the church's fund when it comes to the income that the warden and the beadsmen receive. And so he starts a social change campaign of sorts in order to expose possible wrong use of the church money, so that hopefully he can, make some positive change. And all of these actually affects the warden's life, because before that he has never really questioned about how much he receives. He himself is also a fairly kind character. He is a very kind character in this book, and you sort of feel sorry for him, even though you know that the campaign that John Bolt starts in this book is something that comes from a place of good intention. But you also feel that the warden is being put in a very tight situation. He has never intended for any kinds of injustice to happen, and yet all of these things are putting a lot of pressure on him. People around him, the presses are getting interested in all this. The social change campaign is getting more and more traction. The beatsmen are signing petitions. People are writing novels about this warden. It's it's really stressful for this warden, and I certainly felt that. And it was kind of anxiety inducing. Particularly at that moment, because in real life I was also quite stressed out. But anyway, I thought that this book was also nicely written. I had a good experience reading it, because I thought that the writing of Anthony Trollope was, he has this kind of like a nice, humorous voice with a bit of a sharp wit. The satirical element is definitely there in this book. So yeah, it was a fairly enjoyable reading, and I would say, even though I felt anxious on behalf of the warden, and I thought that was good. If the book can make you feel that way, I would say that is a good thing. So yeah, now moving on to the next book that I finished. This one was Joanne Harris' Chocolat. Now this book is different because, after getting really anxious and nervous about, while reading The Warden, this is more of a comfort read. So basically what happens in this book is we see this woman who comes to a town in France with her daughter. This woman's name is Vianne Rocher, and she is with her daughter Anouk. She arrives in this French town of Lansquenet-Soutan, and basically this town is kind of like an isolated town. It's the inhabitants are sort of isolated from the outside world as well. Like, it's not completely isolated, like they don't know anything outside, but it affects their thinking towards outsiders in general. So many of the inhabitants sort of develop this kind of more insular attitude towards outsiders and foreigners, or even people who are different from them. And so when Vianne arrives in this town, she's met with suspicion. And as soon as she's there, she opens a chocolate shop, which sort of puts her in a position that is somewhat tricky. Basically, she has gained some allies or friends because she has great people skills, but at the same time she knows how to make nice chocolates that sort of brings people to her side. And at the same time, there is also a bit of magical element in this book as well. And but at the same time, she is also opposed by some people in that town, mainly the local priest, Father Reynaud. And basically this priest character is sort of like acting as an antagonist in this book, who thinks that Vianne's presence in the town is causing all sorts of sinful acts to happen. This priest thinks that Vianne represents sinful indulgence with her chocolate shop, and he's worried that the rest of the town is going to fall into the temptation of chocolate and sin in general. That kind of slippery slope. So yeah, this book deals a lot with the idea of foreigners, how people treat foreigners, how people treat outsiders, xenophobia, definitely a bit of racism, theme being explored in here, but I think the main ones would definitely be xenophobia, especially when it comes to how one treats a different group of people, who lives a different life and different culture, different languages, and all those things. And I would say that Chocolat is not exactly a book that I would read very deeply. Like, if I were to nitpick every single details in Chocolat, I would be somewhat disappointed because some of the portions in this book just felt kind of wasn't really done in the most nuanced way. Like, my main issue with this book, I thought it was a nice book, a 3-star book, but I did have some small issue with it, and that would be the priest character, which I felt was really stereotypically evil. Like, he does not feel like a nuanced antagonistic character. At the end of the book, he just appears as this like really weird Disney villain with a very weird sort of comeuppance on happening to him, and it just sort of takes away all of the potential that how this priest could be humanized. And so instead, at the end, we see this priest is, after all, still kind of remains this sort of like cardboard cutout villain, and I was slightly disappointed by that. But overall, this book was a comfy read, and definitely I was happy to have read this book during the time when I was when I really needed something that was so cozy. So yeah, my 4th book would be The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And this one was translated into English by Deborah Smith. This book was nice. I liked it. And it's definitely a very popular book, I would say. It won the Man Booker International Prize. And I finally read it. And so basically this is about a Korean woman who lives in Korea. Her name is Yeong-hye. One day, she receives a dream, and that dream inspires her to become a vegetarian. And she declares her intention and her decision to become a vegetarian to her husband, who obviously does not take it well, because her husband thinks that being a vegetarian in their society is not normal, it's weird. And so do her family. Actually, the rest of her family members also think that Yeong-hye is being silly, like, why? And they sort of become somewhat extreme to her when in their reaction to her becoming a vegetarian. They start to force her to eat meat. They treat her badly. But the thing is, this book is not exactly told from the point of view of Yeong-hye herself. It is divided into 3 sections. The first one from the point of view of her husband. The second one would be from the point of view of her somewhat perverted brother-in-law. And the third section would be from the point of view of her sister. And in each of these sections, we see how Yeong-hye's decision to become a vegetarian is somewhat received by all of these different characters, and what are their general opinions on Yeong-hye's decision, and also on Yeong-hye herself, what their opinions are. So this book is not really about the fact that a person decides to become a vegetarian. Like vegetarianism just feels like more like a pretext but rather I would say that this book really kind of highlights how women in a patriarchal society, in this case in the Korean society, sort of face this kind of situation in which sometimes they just can't really do exactly what they really want to do. Like in this case, Yeong-hye, she wants to become a vegetarian, but she is met with so much resistance, even though it's like for her it's like just a simple, dieting decision, but apparently it causes so many people to freak out. So I really like the way that this book explores how Yeong-hye herself just kind of experiences some kind of mental deterioration after she decides to become a vegetarian, and all the other characters just sort of thinks that, well, she becomes a vegetarian because guess what? Now she's crazy. So that's why she decides to become a vegetarian, because she's crazy. And it feels, of course, much more nuanced than that, but it also kind of makes you feel somewhat frustrated on behalf of Yeong-hye. And overall, I thought that this book was written very nicely. We see different layers of how people receive Yeong-hye's decision in here, and it's of course frustrating, but at the same time there is some kind of catharsis that happens at the end of this book. It's I wouldn't say it's like a big catharsis, but there is some kind of a I would say character development happening. So I'm not gonna talk more about that, but I do like the third portion of this book, which was where most of the more enlightening parts of this book happens. So yeah, with this book, I conclude my wrap-up video. And I've not done a long video for quite a while. I'm surprised that this video is about more than 30 minutes. Apparently I talk too much. Anyway, that's it for my monthly wrap-up, and I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.